All right, it is now 11 a.m. We've had a few more people join us. Just as a reminder, if you are having audio issues hearing this time around, just let us know. I sent out the video version of the last session to everybody to make sure that anybody who may have missed the audio was able to hear it the second time around. So if you do have audio issues, just let us know. But it is now 11 a.m. So Patrick, you are free to proceed with the course.
All right, thank you, Nick. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. Here we're going to do Unit 4 of this lesson, Community Recovery and Planning. You know, some things we got to look at, the community as a whole, and we got to plan, see what the community needs. On completion of this unit, we're going to be able to identify the strategy for stakeholder engagement. We're going to identify some of the primary goals and information management during the recovery. Then we're going to get into how an information management strategy can facilitate recovery, and also a whole community issues during the recovery. Then we're going to demonstrate the best of our ability how to create a targeted information strategy for disaster recovery. And then we're going to speak about 6 community planning tools that can assist in disaster recovery. Now, first and foremost, engaging the whole community. I know in the last couple of lessons we mentioned this, getting involved with the whole community. Remember, it is a philosophical approach in how to conduct the management business of emergency management. You know, we got to look at some of the benefits. In engaging the whole community, we are allowing and encouraging management of the whole community is critical to successful recovery process. Things we can look at is how would you go about engaging community members that are interested, or affected by recovery decisions, but are not necessarily part of the recovery team. I'm going to cover that again. I want you to take some time and think about this. How would you go about engaging community members that are interested or affected by recovery decisions, but are not necessarily part of the recovery team? So we got to look at the ones that are very interested in this and affected by the recovery decision. So if you have any ideas, put it in the question box or the chat box. And while you're doing that, you know, let's think about the stakeholders, some of the community groups and organizations or individuals who should be considered when developing your strategy for the community engagement. Let's put those answers in the chat box. To get you started, let's look at some of them. Take community councils. You know, are they being engaged in your community? Some volunteer organizations. There are some good ones. Faith-based organizations. They are always involved in the community. You know, individual citizens. They're not part of the recovery team, but they're always interested in helping. Community leaders, a couple of representatives. You know, school boards. There's some good partners. And the list goes on. So if you have any more, please put it in the chat box below. No. Let's take a look at community engagement in recovery. You know, there's some of the things you can do. You can help encourage participation in the recovery of decisions process. You know, encourage them to participate. You know, identify the opportunities and create partnerships. This is big. Creating a community partner is what you need. You know, help the community understand the role of the government and the stakeholder responsibilities. What are the stakeholder responsibilities? Challenge them. Help engage special interest groups. There's a lot of groups out there who are willing to help out. Then help create the ownership in the process. Make them feel part of the whole community, during a disaster recovery. I know y'all have fires there, earthquakes, everybody's always willing to help. Let's look at some information management goals. The primary goal of information management is to be effectively collect and distribute accurate and timely disaster recovery information. This is very important. It's critical. So effectively, there are many elements that enhance effectiveness. We're going to cover a variety of ways to help you be more effective in your information management tasks. That's something we're going to do today. So on the surface, it may seem like a pretty good, straightforward task, but sometimes in every aspect of the recovery effort comes with specific needs for information. And some challenges in getting the information out to the attending audience. That's some of the things you can do, because sometimes during disaster, you don't have the internet or electricity. You got to get the information out the best way you can, and timely and accurate. Let's take a look at who is your recovery information intended to reach. So we got to remember, it is critical to understand who your recovery information messages is intended to reach. It'll be essential to develop a strategy for collecting, developing, and disseminating the information. Take a look at who is your audience. What are the demographics of your community? Those are very key. What are specific challenges arise when trying to communicate with these audiences? You might have a language barrier. You got non-English speaking, disabled, the elderly, or other population segments. Not everybody is going to be able to understand one speaker. How do you social or psychologically impact the disaster on the community, impact your community strategy? How do social and psychological impact it? Some things you got to pay attention to. See, some of these things are very unique and they're very challenging. It may require special efforts to communicate effectively. Some of these issues must be considered as you develop your community strategy. Coordinated community efforts. See, all agencies will need to coordinate community efforts to provide a clear and effective recovery information. In some cases, the local government departments and the partner agencies will have information they need to provide to the public. Then have the coordination and collaborate among those agencies and organizations that have important information for the public that would be very useful if the information is to be clear and effective. So when you coordinate help, it will provide consistency in the information provided, some clarification to who will release the information, and very, very clear and direct on who serves as a spokesperson on specific issues. I'm going to give you some follow-up questions, that's important to consideration for coordination and community efforts. What department or agency handles the information management function in your community? That's a good question. What department or agency handles the information management functions in your community?
For Sacramento County, what subdivision of the county serves as the PIO during emergencies?
GIC, the EOC,
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, a JIC would definitely serve. So Joint Information Center or the Joint Information System, JIC, just is how you would coordinate across all agencies within the county within the response, the communications, the public information of the recovery of the response. The PIO is typically the lead PIO for the county will typically serve as that lead to the JIC. Within the county, who services the PIO on larger scale operations? And PIO means Public Information Officer, by the way. Looks like, okay. So Ben, it looks like the OCE, the Office of the Chief Executive, has a PIO that'll serve for the county. Thank you.
Yeah, those are great answers. Thank you for participating. Now, what are the agencies, the departments, or organizations that will need to coordinate the information to ensure consistency? You already answered some of that. What are the agencies that, or departments that, and organizations that will need to coordinate information to ensure the consistency? That's another good question. And at the same time, who will staff the information management function? Remember, if you want to participate, put it in the chat box or the question. I will read that again. What are some of the agencies or departments and organizations that will need to coordinate information to ensure its consistency? I know in Sacramento, y'all have a lot of local agencies there in your community to help coordinate this information to make sure it's get out.
A good example of this would be during a wildfire situation, especially in the outlying parts of the county. What agencies would need to coordinate together in order to get those evacuations out, in order to inform the public? I'm seeing water resources, transportation, sheriff. Anybody else?
I like that. General Services, Office of Emergency Services, County Roads Law, Sheriff's Office, EMS. I think I saw earlier somebody mentioned transportation services. Yes. Transportation is the big one. All right, thanks for participating. Information management, that's what we're discussing tonight. We communicate the specifics and the recovery of the efforts. Recovery officials from each organization must share the latest information and sign off on information to be released to the public, the media. Strong internal collaboration will ensure the recovery team speaks with one voice and follows a common agenda. Use a proactive approach. Communication is step one. Step two is monitoring how the message has been received and perceived. Poll key figures. Develop information management strategy. We got to monitor the media to determine the accuracy of information reaching the community. We got to work to supply the answers for identified information gaps. Be collaborative and build the trust. So some of the questions that we consider for effective information gathering and develop of a communication strategy are this: can no news be good news? Put yes or no in the box. Then no news be good news. What happens in a information void? There's no communication.
A big thing to think
Nobody
about is
knows what's
social
going
media.
on.
What happens when there's no communications coming out? What happens on social media?
Yeah. Lots of false information. Rumors start. Yes. Assumptions are made. Last thing we need to do. If no news, there's no way to verify the message that's still being sent to and received. Thank you for that, Frank. Misinformation. Been down that road before. Thank you all for your answers. You know, who will monitor the accuracy of information and how it is received and perceived by the public? Who will monitor this, the accuracy of it? Whose job is to do that? PIO. Good question. Good answer. You know. All right. Another question for you. How can you build a collaborative, trusting working relationship with local media and key community figures? I'm going to ask that again. How can you build a collaborative, trusting working relationship with local media and key community figures? Ongoing relationship and collaboration with them? Yes. Continue meetings. Provide information timely. And keep them very informed. Being honest about the situation is very important. Regular contact. I'm one of them guys that don't like a lot of meetings, but in some cases, you need to have a lot of meetings to make sure everybody's on the same page. Clear communication, once again. Thanks for your participation. All right, let's get to some more information on management. I said this earlier, timing is everything. That is important. So I'm asking this question. What kinds of information would be delivered during the early phase of a disaster recovery? What is some of the information? No, you got to think about essentials of what is damaged. Remember, define the emergency. Yes. Once you define the emergency, you can begin assessing it. Who do you contact? That's good. Remember, making short-term repairs once you define what the emergency is. Once you find out what is damaged, the status and updated keys issues. That's good. Take a look at what services have been shut down. You have to look at that too. What else is out there? The next steps. Yep. Clearly define the evacuation route. That's one of the things we're going to cover later in this lesson. Where the residents should take the refuge and evacuate. That is important. We'll look at this. What activities that are taking place within the jurisdiction as well as what can be expected the next few days. All right, I got another question for you. What kind of information is important to deliver in midterm recovery? Now we're talking about midterm recovery. Disaster just happened. Now we defined what happened, what was destroyed, what we need to do. Let's look at the midterm portion of this. We got to look at how to navigate recovery programs and the process that we have in place. That's some of the midterm things we can look at. Look at the information about reconstruction and redevelopment buyout. Look at making permanent repairs to that was damaged. Continue to the status of important community service. We can continue the status of repairs and community infrastructures. Status of damage when how to return back to normal. Anybody else? Current disaster information for the local assistance center, the locations, key resources, numbers, and information. Some good answers there. I have another one for you. What kind of information is important to deliver in the long term? Now, disasters happen. Now we're midway through it. Now we realize that it's going to take longer to get back to normal. Especially with COVID-19, it's taking longer to get back to normal, longer than expected. So, a couple of things we can do: status of stakeholders engagement activities, recovery efforts, contact steps taken. Thank you, Ben. Think about the buyout program, as I mentioned earlier, and this process. Address specific services, permits that are required, fees and reductions. Yes, those are some good ones. You don't need to establish some permits. We're going to get into land later, using development land, long-term to redevelopment. You got to think about continued information about incomplete and midterm recovery issues. So I'm going to end with this here. Just like warning, information during an emergency, the timing of recovery information is very critical. It must be delivered when the public needs and when it can be best used for the information. So remember, it's very critical in this situation. Managing expectations. I want everybody to take a step back here and think about all that's happening now. You got to manage the expectations. Communities should include elements that realistically manage community expectations. Let's say, why is it important to include expectation management in your information management strategy? Why is that important? Once again, why it is important to include expectation in management, especially in information management strategy. Why is that very important? Some starters to help you out with. It might provide an understanding of the scope of the event, set the goal, yes. What else? Because we all need to dot support to the, what was that, Nancy? To the same goal? Support to the same plan. Good. What else it does? Does it build trust in community leadership? And also it allows an alternate plan to be developed. It reduces frustration and misunderstanding. That's one of the things. Let's look at this. What type of incidents can derail expectation management efforts? Do not overpromise. I saw that somewhere, Frank. That is very important. I was reading an article about a disaster in North Carolina. The recovery manager put on there, do not overpromise. I love that answer. Once again, what type of incident can derail expectation management efforts? What are these efforts? Uninformed promises made by officials. That goes back to what you just said, Frank. Lack of adequate detail and information. Miscues, misquotes, prints by the media. That's a big one. One of the big things, conflicted information. That's the last thing you want to do, conflicted information. I'm going to go back to lack of interagency cooperation. Oh, that's a long story, Nancy. I don't want to get into that. Yeah, lack of interagency cooperation. Yeah, that's important. We're going to move on to the next one. Encouraging recovery. You know, do everything you can. Do everything you can to work into partnership with all stakeholders in the community. You got to do everything you can. You know, because recovery is a game that everyone in the community gets to play. I wouldn't say it's a game, but it seems like it's a game. We got to note that both community engagement and information management strategies are critical to a successful process. You know, because we got to think about when it's appropriate, the message to the community should reflect that the recovery is a team effort that includes all stakeholders in the community. That's one of the big things. It's a big team effort. When you manage the expectations, I apologize, I hit my mouse. Too far. Planning and community development. Let's look at the recovery role in community planning. You know, analyze existing community development problems and issues. We got to identify the options and solutions. So, because when we're planning or community department, it has an important role in disaster recovery. Because we got to think about not all the communities are large enough to have the significant resources to have their own. We got to think about the disaster phases, providing ample opportunity for the community planning department to apply its tools and techniques to identify solutions and options for the community's future. I'm giving you some examples. Participate in the damage assessment and situation analysis. That's one. We got to review all the proposals for rebuilding the damaged areas. That's going to take time. We got to look at reviewing the development proposals and building permits, as we said earlier, for compliance for federal, state, and the local requirements. Everybody has different requirements. We got to do coordinating the hazard mitigation process. We all know that takes time. We got to look at participating in recovery of task force. I'm gonna give you 6 tools here, 6 planning tools. One of them is the general plan and element. Because these are tools that describe in this slide are common and local powers that can have a major impact on the community recovery from a disaster. You know, each of these tools got to be looked at, will be described in detail the remainder of the section. We're going to go along zoning ordinance, subdivision regulations, capital improvement programming, transfer development rights. Going to get into what that means. And when appropriate, mapping. Okay, general plan and elements. Let's look at this. Here it talks about land use and transportation safety and public utilities and open space. We're going to get into these. You know, the general plan, sometimes called a comprehensive plan, and the elements are used to describe the guide existing and the future of social economy, the environmental features of the community. Sometimes it describes the direction and the pace of the community development. Usually it takes like a 5 years increment to forecast this. You know, some of the elements I mentioned, as I said, land use, transportation, safety, public utilities, and open space. Let's talk about zoning. Because, you know, zoning regulations and maps are designated for permanent uses of the land based on the map zones. because they separate one set of land uses for another. Commercials, housing, because you got to think about zoning may be used for basic regulations to use which land may be put. Now you think about it may regulate building height, lot coverage, similar characteristics, or some combination of these. In DC, I ran into a lot of that. The zoning, buildings can't be so high. You can only go so far, only so wide. Some of the regulations on the maps are important part of the guidelines for participation in flood insurance programs. Some regulations are cross-referenced with special flood hazards areas identified in the communities for flood maps and studies and specific permitted lands uses within these areas. Subdivision regulations. Let's look at this. It's a process by which the land is divided into smaller pieces. Now you got more things to cover, a lot of things to cover in a big area. So the subdivision is a process which tracks the land and divides into smaller pieces, parcels, lots, or building sites. Look at state grants, police powers, the local governments to allow the regulations of land use for health, environmental safety, and similar purposes. The regulations enable a community to ensure that the new neighborhoods and other land divisions are properly designed. Some of them, disaster recovery, the subdivision regulations may provide an opportunity for the community to rebuild with regulations and hazard and environment concerns. Let's look at capital improvements. What is it? It can help direct future growth for rebuilding. Sometimes after a disaster, the decisions sometimes will have to be made about repairing and replacing utilities, the roads, the bridges, and other infrastructures. And sometimes the recovery and the mitigation skills can be accomplished by consolidating sometimes and relocating or eliminating these capital investments. Following a disastrous wildfire, in some communities, especially our communities there, you might decide to consolidate 3 destroyed police stations into a single new structure while serving the same area. There's cases like that. Here in my community, we're only so big, we have one station that serves all of us. So you got to think about when you're combining community development departments, also in depth at a grand manship. Since many of the plans or proposals rely on federal and state programs, you got to look at their funding. Some of these departments may be especially effective in identifying outside funding sources for disaster recovery and mitigation projects. Talk about the transfer of development rights. This allows the landowners to sell or trade their development rights to other landowners. Usually it's such that the second landowner can increase the density of their development. Now, in some local governments, I don't know about your own, they transfer the development rights to preserve the open space or historic structures or prevent development in hazard-prone areas. You don't want to rebuild back in a hazard-prone area. You're defeating the purpose. Look at the mapping of this. Sometimes the hazard mapping it is very important in disaster recovery operations. Knowing what's going to be hit, because knowing is always going to be happen in that area on a yearly basis. So you got to develop. The community develops and uses the maps on a daily basis as part of their day-to-day local government role in the disaster situation. Now, when mapping capabilities can be used to display the damage assessment use your maps to recover and the hazard mitigation information. Because the GIS will use extensive by building inspections, public works personnel as they execute their recovery and mitigation responsibility. So the mapping, let's look at this. Mapping is also used for tools displaying information from the county assessor's office. I'll give you an example. It's one of the properties of valuation data from a county assessor office that could overlay the maps of the damaged area. This results in information of the damaged areas, and the value of the property within those areas could be useful to a recovery plan. It can be a very useful tool. Any questions so far? If they're not, we covered a couple of things. Do you see the recovery process as an opportunity to include climate change and mitigation projects? Ms. Karen? Nick, you want to participate in this?
Yeah, for sure. Sorry about that. I was offline trying to take care of something else. So definitely, one of the things we want to look at, and one of the documents we gave you as well, really talks about the idea of utilizing redevelopment and post-disaster development to incorporate mitigation and climate change actions moving forward. So as we're looking at, ocean levels rising, increasing heat, we have to be taking those things into account when we rebuild. So one of the things I've worked on a lot is riverine flooding throughout the Midwest. River levels are rising along with ocean levels every year. And so there's less and less available riverfront property for these homes to be rebuilt on. And so what FEMA is doing and what communities are working with FEMA to do is go through and buy out the lots in order instead of having people rebuild on them, so that way there's not these repetitive loss properties. And so when you get into disaster recovery, you'll find that term repetitive loss. It comes up a lot, and those are the properties that get hit every time, whether it's flooding, whether it's wildfires, whatever it may be. Those are what we're looking at, and that really is impacted by climate change, by rising river and by rising ocean levels. So that's something that we want to take into account moving forward, and you can project that as well. So if you know that the ocean's rising a certain number of inches every year, and that it's taken away a certain number of feet of oceanfront property, you want to take that into account. You can project out how far and how long it will be until certain tracts of property are no longer able to be developed on. So these are things we want to make sure we're keeping in mind when we do post-disaster recovery, and we're trying to make sure that we're keeping those mitigation thoughts in mind while we're doing that.
Karen, did that sums it up for you? All right, thanks. Anybody else have any questions they would like to ask during this time? All right, some of the things we spoke about in today's lesson was we identified some of the strategies for the stakeholders engagement. Some of the things we identified, the primary goal of information during recovery, information management during recovery. Then we explained how information management strategy can facilitate recovery. Remember, the information you put out got to be correct. Then we identify the whole community issues during recovery, whatever problems they are having. Then we went and demonstrated how to create a targeted information strategy for disaster recovery. And we spoke about 6 community tools that can assist in disaster recovery. Once again, if you don't have any questions, or if you do have any, please put it in the chat box. Any questions or comments? Nick?
Patrick, it looks like I don't see any more questions coming through. With that, I just want to thank you all for coming on today. Your participation has been really appreciated. This class session has been phenomenal just because of the back and forth and the participation you guys provided. It really helps us when we open that dialogue. It helps us to really get into the information deeper, and it gives you guys a better experience in terms of learning. So thank you for participating. Thank you for answering all the questions, and thanks, Patrick, for facilitating all of that.
All right. Thank you for joining the class today as well.